Welcome back. Close your eyes for just a moment and imagine the year is 432 BCE, and the sun is only an hour over the hills east of the city. You are standing on a dirt path worn smooth by 10,000 sandals, and ahead of you, catching the early light like a piece of struck bronze, is a hill crowned with white marble. Below you, a city of perhaps 250,000 souls is waking up. A baker is dragging open his shutters. A donkey brays somewhere behind a row of mud brick houses. Two men are already arguing about politics at a well, the way they always do, the way they always will for a few more decades yet. None of them know it, but they are living inside the single most influential half-century in the history of Western thought, and none of them know how briefly it will last. Using AI reconstruction, restored classical paintings, and the physical evidence pulled from beneath the modern city, we are going to walk through Athens exactly as it stood at its height, street by street, temple by temple, before we watch, in real time, how it all began to unravel. And before we're done, I'll show you exactly what remains standing today, so you can see it with your own eyes, 25 centuries later. But this gleaming city did not begin gleaming. Rewind further, to around 900 BCE, and Athens is barely a city at all. It is a scattering of villages clustered around a rocky outcrop, inhabited by farmers and shepherds who worship at simple open-air shrines rather than temples of stone. The soil of Attica, the region surrounding Athens, is thin and stony, poorly suited to grain, and this single geological fact would end up shaping everything that followed. Unable to feed themselves easily from their own land, the early Athenians turned instead to olives, to grapes, and eventually to the sea, becoming traders and sailors almost out of necessity. Their pottery, plain and dark at first, began traveling along the coasts of the Aegean by the 8th century BCE, carrying oil and wine to Crete, to the islands, to the shores of Asia Minor. There was no democracy yet, no Parthenon, no philosophers debating in open colonnades. There were only aristocratic clans, arguing over land and cattle, and a hilltop fortress they called the Acropolis, used more for defense than devotion. The people scraping out a living on those slopes had no possible way of knowing that their descendants would give the world the word democracy itself, or that foreigners 2,500 years later would still be studying their laws, their plays, and their buildings as though they were sacred texts. Now walk forward again, to the middle of the 5th century BCE, and the transformation is almost impossible to comprehend. The Acropolis you would have seen in 447 BCE was a construction site, alive with dust, scaffolding, and the ringing of iron chisels against Pentelic marble, hauled in from quarries 11 miles to the northeast. The Parthenon itself, the temple to Athena Parthenos, would eventually rise to a length of about 70 meters and a width of 30, ringed by 46 massive fluted columns, each one subtly curved rather than perfectly straight, an architectural illusion designed to trick the human eye into seeing pure, rigid perfection. Inside stood a colossal statue of the goddess, nearly 12 meters tall, her skin carved from ivory and her robes layered in gold, weighing, by some ancient accounts, well over 1,000 kilograms. The stone of the temple was not the cold, bare white we associate with Greek ruins today. It was painted, brilliantly, in reds, blues, and golds, with friezes depicting processions, battles, and the birth of the gods running in a continuous band around the building. The whole structure had taken roughly 15 years to complete by the time of that walk, funded partly by tribute pouring in from an empire of allied city-states, and construction crews were still finishing decorative details on nearby buildings, even as priests were already holding ceremonies inside. It was not a museum, it was a living, unfinished, occasionally chaotic worksite, wrapped around one of the most sacred spaces in the ancient world. Below the Acropolis, the civic and religious heart of the city pulsed in the open square known as the Agora. Here, under plane trees and beneath long-covered walkways called stoas, Merchants sold fish, pottery, and cloth within shouting distance of philosophers debating the nature of justice. The Agora was also home to the law courts, where juries of up to 500 ordinary citizens, chosen by lot rather than appointment, decided the fates of their neighbors in cases ranging from property disputes to capital crimes. A short walk away stood the Pnyx, a natural hillside amphitheater where the assembly met, and where any male citizen, regardless of wealth, could stand and speak his mind to thousands of his fellow Athenians. This was democracy in its rawest, most physical form. Not an abstract principle, but an actual crowd of shouting, arguing men on a hillside, deciding matters of war and peace by a show of hands. Layered into this same civic landscape were older religious traditions, shrines to household gods and local heroes that predated the grand marble temples by centuries. Reminders that beneath the polished philosophy of classical Athens ran a much older, more superstitious current of ritual and belief. Down in the streets themselves, life was loud, crowded, and far from glamorous. Most Athenians lived in small, cramped houses built from mud brick and timber, their narrow, unpaved lanes turning to mud after rain and thick with dust in summer. The smell of a normal morning would have hit you immediately. Baking bread, animal dung, fish drying in the sun, and the acrid tang of tanneries working leather on the edges of the city. Slaves, who may have made up close to a third of the population, worked alongside free laborers in workshops producing pottery, textiles, and weapons. Women of citizen families spent most of their lives inside the home, managing households and weaving cloth, largely absent from the public spaces where men debated politics. Graffiti and scratched inscriptions found on broken pottery fragments, called ostraka, reveal an oddly familiar side of ancient life. Petty insults, political grudges, and the names of men citizens wanted exiled, scratched hastily onto cheap clay before a vote. Ordinary Athenians gathered at public fountains to gossip, haggled loudly over the price of olive oil, and packed into narrow streets that could feel, on a festival day, uncomfortably close to modern crowd density. For spectacle and civic pride, nothing rivaled the Theater of Dionysus, carved into the southern slope of the Acropolis itself. By the height of the classical period, it could seat somewhere between 14 and 17,000 spectators on tiered stone benches, gathering nearly the entire free population of the city for religious festivals that doubled as the birthplace of Western drama. Here, the tragedies of Sophocles and Euripides were performed for the first time, alongside biting political comedies that mocked living politicians by name, tolerated as part of a festival dedicated to the god of wine and revelry. Attendance was not passive entertainment. It was civic duty and communal identity, an experience that bound rich and poor together in the same open-air space for an entire day of performance, judged competitively by a panel of citizens. For a glimpse of privilege, consider the private homes of Athens' wealthiest citizens, tucked discreetly behind unremarkable exterior walls in neighborhoods near the Agora. Unlike the grand palaces of later Roman elites, wealthy Athenian houses were deliberately modest from the street, a reflection of democratic values that frowned on open displays of superiority. Step through the doorway, however, and the modesty vanished. Interior courtyards held painted walls, imported furniture inlaid with ivory, and mosaic floors made from natural pebbles, arranged into geometric patterns. Wealthy families owned dozens of household slaves, dined reclining on couches during private symposia, accompanied by wine, music, and philosophical debate, and commissioned fine-painted pottery from the city's best workshops. Yet whatever protection wealth offered from the ordinary struggles of Athenian life, it would offer no protection at all from what was coming. Plague and prolonged war were, in the end, remarkably democratic in their own right. The turning point arrived not as a single dramatic blow, but as a slow, grinding unraveling, stretched across nearly 3 decades. In 431 BCE, long-simmering rivalry with Sparta erupted into open war, a conflict historians now call the Peloponnesian War. Spartan forces, unable to breach Athens' famous long walls connecting the city to its port, instead ravaged the surrounding countryside year after year, forcing rural Athenians to crowd inside the city walls for safety. That overcrowding, combined with wartime stress on food and sanitation, set the stage for catastrophe. In 430 BCE, a devastating plague swept through the packed city, killing an estimated 1/4 to 1/3 of the population within a few short years, including, in 429 BCE, the celebrated statesman Pericles himself, the very man who had overseen the Parthenon's construction. Ancient accounts describe the disease striking suddenly, with high fever, and Athenians at the time had no understanding of germ theory, believing instead that the gods had turned against them or that poisoned wells were to blame, when modern researchers now suspect a virulent epidemic, possibly typhoid fever, though its exact identity remains debated to this day. The war ground on afterward for another 25 years, draining Athens' treasury, its fleet, and its manpower, until a catastrophic naval defeat in 404 BCE finally forced the city to surrender, its walls torn down, its empire dissolved, its golden age effectively over, even as its buildings still stood. In the centuries that followed, Athens never fully vanished, but it faded, cycling through periods of Macedonian control, Roman rule, and eventual decline as the ancient world's center of gravity shifted elsewhere. Temples were converted into churches, statues were melted down or shipped away as trophies, and the Parthenon itself was later used as a mosque under Ottoman rule, its long religious life continuing under faiths its original builders could never have imagined. In 1687, disaster struck again when Venetian forces bombarding the Ottoman-held Acropolis triggered a massive explosion in gunpowder the Ottomans had stored inside the Parthenon itself, blasting away a significant portion of the ancient structure in a single catastrophic moment. For centuries afterward, the ruins sat half-forgotten, picked over by travelers, looted by collectors, and slowly buried beneath dust, rubble, and later construction. Serious archaeological study began in earnest in the 19th century, as European scholars and, later, Greek archaeologists themselves began systematically excavating the Agora and the slopes of the Acropolis. What they found astonished them. Thousands of everyday objects, broken pottery scratched with private jokes and political grudges, children's toys, courtroom voting tokens, and the foundations of buildings described in ancient texts but never confirmed to exist. Excavations in the 20th century, particularly extensive work in the Agora beginning in the 1930s, uncovered layer upon layer of the city, revealing not a museum piece frozen in marble grandeur, but the messy, lived-in remains of ordinary human existence. It is worth pausing here, honestly, without exaggeration. These were not just ruins. They were homes where children were born, workshops where a potter spent 40 years perfecting a single glaze, courtrooms where nervous citizens argued for their lives. Every column that fell was once someone's daily view. Every street was walked by people who loved, worried, and hoped, exactly as we do now, certain their own world was permanent, right up until it wasn't. Today, if you climb the same path up the Acropolis, you'll find the Parthenon still standing, scarred by that 1687 explosion and by centuries of weather, but remarkably intact, currently undergoing careful, ongoing restoration using some of the original marble blocks recovered from the site itself. The Theater of Dionysus survives as a lower tier of stone seating, quieter now, but its shape unmistakably the same bowl that once held 17,000 voices. The Agora is a walkable archaeological park today, its foundations marked in stone, its reconstructed Stoa of Attalos now serving as a museum housing many of those everyday objects, ostraca, children's toys, and courtroom tokens, sitting behind glass just meters from where they were dropped over 2,000 years ago. The grand private houses of the wealthy have mostly vanished beneath the modern city, though occasional mosaic floors still surface during subway construction, forcing engineers to redesign tunnels around them. Much of the Parthenon's original sculpture, controversially, now sits in the British Museum in London rather than in Athens, a subject of ongoing international dispute that continues into the present day. And that colossal ivory and gold statue of Athena that once stood inside the temple is gone entirely, lost to time, known to us now only through ancient descriptions and small marble copies. If there's a lost city, a vanished civilization, or a single dramatic turning point in history you'd love to see brought back to life like this, drop it in the comments below. I genuinely do read every one of them, and your suggestions shape where we go next. If you enjoyed this journey, a like and a subscribe helps this channel keep making them. I'll see you in the next one.